Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan.
Please welcome the hosts of the hit podcast Body Bags, Joseph Scott Morgan and Dave Mack.
Just got through getting my tail kicked by Nancy Grace. But what else is new, right? I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Thank you, guys.
There was a story that started September 13th, 1964. Quick show of hands, how many of you were born after that? Wow. Dude, we're old.
Yikes.
Sorry, I just didn't expect that. I thought it was going to be different. I thought it was going to go a different way. 50-year-old woman, September 13th, 1964. She is showing an apartment in Albany, New York. She's trying to rent it out. This is in the days before Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist and things like that. And we tend to look at that time as a gentler, softer time. It's not. Whenever we look at these horrible crimes that happened before digital media, we just hear about them all the time now. Back then, this scared me when I read it because this poor woman, she was showing her apartment to a possible renter, and she was bludgeoned, he'll explain, raped, need no explanation, but she was tortured for hours with heated kitchen knives in an attack that was so vicious. She didn't die from the actual hitting, this horrible attack that went on for hours. She bled to death. So imagine the torture that she went through, knowing you get to a certain point where you can't recover, you know? If you remember the Manson family murders, the first one, you know, with the Tate murders, Abigail Folger, you know, she was running in the front yard and Patricia Krenwinkel, I think, was on her back and was stabbing her. And she said, "Why don't you stop? I'm already dead." Before you die, you know. And she had to know, Joe.
Yeah, you do. And, you know, with particularly, you know, I talk a lot. And, you know, when we do body bags, the beauty of it, I think, at least in my mind, is the fact that we try to teach, right? That's the big thing. And I try to approach it from the perspective of maybe most people have not had an opportunity to learn forensics and have the opportunities I've had in my life with education and experience and all those sorts of things. So the driving force with behind what we do is to try to instruct. And we've talked about sharp force injuries on body bags for these many years. We've been going since 21 now, I guess, heading towards 600 episodes. And one of the things about sharp force injuries, we have primarily, there's three, but technically for our purposes today, we're talking about two. So we have stab wounds, right? Everybody understands this. This is a penetrative event where you have someone that is burying a milled edge into somebody's body with a little metal tip, right? And just because you stab someone or someone is stabbed, that does not make that a lethal event. Does everybody understand that? Because there's no guarantee that a subject is going to be struck in a vital area, okay? Now, does that mean that it's not painful? Oh, no, it doesn't. Because one of the things that has been so horrific over the years, because you know that I've been very deeply invested in the Ellen Greenberg case, right? And so every time, a blade hits an area, your pain centers will fire. Well, many of Ellen's injuries, for instance, hit bone, right? And so that doesn't mean that it was totally penetrative, that went into one of her organs, perhaps.
And an obvious suicide, too.
Yeah, an obvious suicide. God. So, when we have that case, in a case like this lingering that goes on, kind of feeds into what I think, and I'm not a behaviorist, I'm not a profiler or a psychologist, but from a medical legal perspective, when we're on the scene, when we do evaluations of bodies, we can begin to see patterns develop, right? Particularly when you have somebody that is probably a sexual sadist, which we would have in this particular case. So she's lingering for a protracted period of time. She would have had an awareness that all of this is going on, being beaten, being stabbed, repeated numbers of times, being moved about this space.
There was something I wanted to ask you about this too. Okay, they were able to break the crime down, and by the way, the reason we're doing this is because it was a cold case that went unsolved for many, many years, but it was solved recently. They said that she was struck in the back of the head, and then she was stabbed in the neck.
Yes.
And then while she was unconscious, she was sexually molested.
Yes.
How can you tell something like that happened when they know that she was unconscious for that, but then was conscious for what came next?
I think that the best you can do is going to be speculative in an event like that, to say whether she was conscious or unconscious. I don't know that there's any way to truly draw that conclusion. However, if you have a post-mortem sexual assault, that means after death, right? We've learned that on body bags over the years. You can deduce that is possible, because if there are any kind of injuries related to those private areas, okay, and you have a forcible sexual assault that goes on, those areas, the tears, those sorts of things that occur, there will not be an associated hemorrhage with that, okay? And many of the people that are sexual sadists and engage in this, they like to have total control over these individuals. Interestingly enough, and I don't know if this is still a thing, but there used to be a whole group of people that would fetishize death, and they would pay individuals to pretend they were dead, to the point that they would have these individuals ice their bodies down while alive and just remain still. That is a thing.
So yeah, so many levels,
it is.
Man.
And
it's not just the person who wants it, but the person willing to do it.
No kidding.
Have you ever sat in ice? You ever had to ice your arm or your back?
Yeah, no. And
that's not a treat.
Yeah, and so these people exist. And the fact that this torture would go on for a protracted period of time, and we haven't even talked about this idea of heating up blaze.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you next, because they being the investigators, they were able to figure out the timeline of how the attack took place. Having done the show, we've done over 500 episodes, heading into 600. And by the way, now on video.
Yeah.
We launched it this week with
this week was
CrimeCon.
our first week. Yeah.
And but there is a way to tell that this sadist, after molesting her while she's unconscious, then heats up knives on the gas stove.
Yep.
And then uses them to torture her by creating images in her body. And they know that she was awake for that.
Yeah, and they've been very nonspecific over the years. Keep in mind, this was all the way back in 1964. But yeah, these are specific patterns that this individual utilized with this knife, and over and over and over again, to create these surface images that they were attempting to do with a knife, and this heated knife. And yeah, she's reactive in the sense that these injuries at autopsy, they were able to tell that there was a response at a cellular level relative to these injuries, where you could tell that she was still alive while all of this was going on. And I think the really sad portion of this, other than all of the horror that we've just kind of described here, is the idea that she went into this with her guard down, because it was a matter of showing a property, which to me, I think that, I don't know how many real estate people I have in the audience. Generally, there's a couple. It can be a very dangerous business, because you don't know who you're going to connect with. And there have been other stories, not exactly like this, but of people that are in the real estate industry where they will just blindly meet somebody, and certainly back then, Dave.
Yeah, in 1964. And by the way, she's no little wallflower. Our victim here was the forewoman at a factory. Knew how to manage men, knew how to boss them around, knew how to get the job done, which is how they found her body, because she didn't show up for work, and she always did. But Joe, the case did go cold.
It did.
Even with all of what you now know took place basically in her kitchen of her home after she was, this guy was such a, just evil at a new level. He took her by surprise by hitting her in the back of the head, That's first thing. But they didn't solve it right away, Joe. And it lingered and went away. And it was not until 2018 that a new detective took over the case and said, give me everything. And Joe points this out a lot, but back in 1964, the detectives that were working this case that had to preserve the evidence, a lot of whether or not these can be solved depends on what they did then. And in this case, they did a good job.
Yeah, they did. And the devil is in the details. When you're standing, and this even applies to this period of time in the medical legal world, when you are standing over a body in an autopsy suite, the evidence that you're going to collect, we think in terms nowadays that we've invented everything in the immediate. You have to understand there were people doing a very difficult job that did not have the technology at their disposal back during that period of time that we do now, where we can turn things around a lot quicker now than they could back then. And certainly those assets were not available to the individuals, things such as DNA, right? DNA was something that was only understood, the medical community understood it, but they didn't even understand things necessarily like medical predispositions to the degree that we understand them today. And it wasn't until Alec Jeffreys in 1984 even began to talk about the utility of DNA applications in Great Britain, and that was back in '84, and that would have been 20 years after that, and it was just in the dawning of time. And now, we're seeing something that is developing to the level that, in my young mind that I was in, all of those years ago when I started out as a forensics investigator, I could not even have envisioned it because there's a new day dawning.
Yeah, there is, and that's where this case ended up. In 2018, when the new investigator took over, she reached out to a school that was working on teaching like Joe does, and as I've met already a number of forensic students. But they took the evidence and ultimately submitted it to Othram. And they actually were able to build out. Othram does amazing work in how they build out, the genealogy of the genetic genealogy is such an incredibly intense thing that they take a sliver, and it keeps going back. It's not like they find this little strand of DNA, insert it into the computer, and out pops the suspect. It doesn't work like that. Oftentimes they get a little bit here, and it goes back to the local detectives, who now have to go back and re-interview more people. They keep narrowing the list until they build a family tree. And next thing you know, they find an uncle, a cousin, somebody in that related field. And then they go, okay, well, who are the possible people here? And they came up with a guy who was 37 years old in 1964, Joseph Nowakowski.
Yes, that's how you say it.
Nowakowski?
Yeah, up in Albany, New York. Yeah. Or the Albany area. Yeah.
By the time they figured out that he was a suspect, not the victim, not the, got to find out for sure, he had been dead for 20 years. He died in 1998. So they went through the very easy task, being facetious. You try to get a body dug up for anything, it ain't easy. Judges take rest in peace very seriously.
All we have to do is look back at Tammy Daybell. I think people think that, families will approach me about cases that are cold or that they have questions about, and they'll say, well, we'll just have her exhumed, or we'll have him exhumed. Okay. Well, first off, you have to find an attorney that will handle that for you, because you got an order of exhumation. And you have to find the police that are invested in it from an investigative standpoint. And then then you have to find a judge that is willing to crack a grave open, because they are not in favor of this. But the fascinating thing about this case is, going back to what I said earlier, you know how in 64, the investigators, people in the morgue, they're handicapped, right? They don't have this access to the same technology, okay? What they did is, back then, they did trace sampling on her body. And they also did a rape kit on her. Now, how many of you guys in the audience, I'd love to see a show of hands, have heard the horror stories about rape kits? Anybody out there have heard this? And it is the honest to goodness truth, because you will have poor victims. Can you imagine? And I hope and I pray to God there's nobody in here that's had to go through the trauma of having been sexually assaulted, then go to an emergency room, and they do a rape kit on a living patient. And you know, that sample, to me, it extends into almost a spiritual level. This is sacred, you know, that you have, okay? This evidence that has been collected, and so many of them have been, you know, kind of defiled, if you will, by the people that collect them. They're not treated in the same regard as other things might be treated, and they begin to degrade over a period of time. The incredible thing about this case is that evidence since 64 was preserved. And they were able to find DNA linkage to this unknown person. And then what makes this cold case so very unique, and I think that Othram, you know, saw this certainly, is that they were able to do this exhumation and collect what they could from those remains of this questioned individual, and be able to go back and do confirmation. But you know, it's kind of a hollow thing, right? You imagine all of her family members. Don't think the family didn't know what had happened to her, you know, in that structure. How many of you guys believe that all of those people are still around today? Those people that loved her, that cared about her. You know, this is sacred ground that you're on when you begin to talk about DNA, the collection of it, and how it should be treated. And in this case, they actually had a victory date.
We had another case. This was one that it began in the most wholesome of ways of all time. Remember the movie Christmas Vacation? Chevy Chase, in the opening scenes, he's driving not the family truckster, but whatever the 1988 version of the truckster was.
I think it was a Taurus station wagon.
They're driving the wagon out, and he gets into a match with a truck, and they're doing some road rage. I guess that was kind of a portion of things to come. And you know, Chevy Chase, who we all know has no real anger issues. My God. Talk about a scene that played out in real life for him. But they go out in the woods to find the Griswold family Christmas tree. Well, I have to wonder, like so many of the vacation movies, I don't know if y'all know this, those are all based in some truth. Go ahead and answer it. Each one of those vacation movies was about a particular family vacation that took place. And I have to wonder if the one they did in 88 was sampling the 1958 Martin family disappearance. It's a 1958 case of a dad, Kenneth Martin. He's 54. His wife, Barbara, is 48. They have 3 daughters. Barbie, well, I would say Barbara, that they call Barbie because mom is Barbara. Virginia, and then they have an 11-year-old that is named Susie. Now, they went off on the Griswold family Christmas, the Martin family Christmas. They actually went out into the country in the first week of December to collect things to use around the house for Christmas decorations. They went out there to collect
greenery and that sort of thing, that you would do trimmings and that sort of thing.
It's the most wholesome. I've never done anything that wholesome in my life. I've never even thought of doing something that wholesome in my life. And I thought, this is December 7th, 1958. And by the way, They have an older son who is in the military, and it, believe it or not, comes into play in the investigation of this story. You're going to learn something here, is that even in the most wholesome of families, doing the most wholesome of family things, if you don't get an answer to what happened, people's imaginations and investigators run wild. And they will create stuff that would have Nancy Grace blowing her eyelashes out. I mean, it got nutty with this family. So, the Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area in Oregon. That's where we are for this case. December 7th, 1958, the Martin family goes out on their Christmas tree decoration hunting expedition, and they never return. UFO picked them up or something. Something happened to the family because they never came home. Car never found. None of the family ever found for a while. Just gone. Joe and I were covering this case and we're like, there's got to be, come on. No. They left the house December 7th, 1958. Didn't come home.
It's one thing if you have 5 people that go missing like this, but to have an automobile, in addition to that, vanish off the face of the planet. You have, and Dave was, being lighthearted there about UFOs, but you begin to think about how can an entire family, a vehicle, how can it just vaporize into nothing? And again, this is back in the 50s. How many of you guys, do I have any friends here from Oregon at all? Anybody? Have you guys heard of this case at all? You have? And I've got to tell you, I'm Louisiana born and raised. I've stood on the banks of the, thank you. I've stood on the banks of the Columbia River. I have never felt so small in my life. If you've never done this, I beg of you, go. It is one of the most powerful things that you will see. You'll know that, this was created. I think it was created to terrify people like me because, you look at and the Mississippi River doesn't really flow slowly. They say that it does, but there's a significant current in it. But the Columbia in and of itself is the stuff of nightmares if you were to go over the edge of this thing. All right. And it will really get your attention. And a lot of people go there. I've been there for the salmon run, which is absolutely amazing. You see these guys going out in the boats. They're catching salmon, where it dumps in. Well, essentially, it's heading to the Pacific Ocean. But you see the power of that. And we know that they were, in fact, adjacent to the river. And Lord knows there's enough evergreens out in that part of the country, which is one of the most lovely places that you could ever visit. Out in that part of the country where you could go and collect that, and their purpose to do this, right, Dave?
And the thing about this is that even in 1958, when they did not have a resolution quickly, this story became a national story. And for months, investigators were there for months. They had a $1,000 reward. Joe and I looked up the value in 1958 versus now, and it's considerable. But $1,000 would have had a few folks out there hunting for it. And nothing until one of the little girls floated up, found in the river. Now, this is months after they're gone. No car is found. They're all missing, and then one of the girls is found. Shortly after that, second girl is found in the river. Now, Joe, based on the months that went by, what condition would those bodies have been? Talking about 11, 13, 14 years old. What would they look like to us after being in that cold, rough river for months? Yeah,
so there's a couple of things you have to consider with human remains in this kind of environment. First off, just the current alone, and there are any kind of obstacles in the water. You have rocky outcroppings. There's a lot of timber that goes into those waters.
Oh, I got to mention one other thing. Yeah. The girls were found 30 miles apart.
Yeah.
And they were found within a week of one another.
Yeah,
They're found
it was
very
roughly a week, yeah.
but 30 miles separated. 1 week and 30 miles. Sorry.
Yeah, and so you can begin to do, if you're trying to do the calculus of this, it's almost impossible to do, because the first thing you have to consider is, was there a known route that somebody, or that this family, and you would have to do a deep dive into this, no pun intended, to go back and say, if they were traveling in the car, is there a common route that they would go on to go on picnics or something like this? Where would potentially be a point of entry into the river? But then you begin to try to calculate the volume of water, which can't, I don't think, that's passing through there, the rate, are there any dam releases, how many storms have you had? And so when you have two bodies that pop up and you see that there is this grand distance, 30 miles that are separating them, first off, it's dumb luck, I think, that these kids were found in the first place, because it's so vast, and it would have easily been, it's quite plausible they could have been just washed out into the Pacific eventually, making it down, traveling at that speed, but they did in fact find them. The trick is, because there were a lot of theories, and I think the son, it played into this, like you had said, because they wanted to know where the son was. He's the only survivor in this family.
And he was in New York State. He was in the military. And what had happened during the investigation, as I told you, that when an obvious answer doesn't come up right away, well, let's just find what we can. They found some bullet shell casings. Yes. And they're like, wait a minute, didn't their son, before he mysteriously took off in the military, didn't he work in a hardware store that sold guns? And wasn't he accused at 17 years old of stealing a gun? Isn't that what happened? And that actually became a running thread. But I want to give you a headline from the Associated Press, an article in 1959. By the way, all of this is out in the open, okay? All of the son, I'm thinking, dude was across the country and still became an actual suspect. A 1959 Associated Press article titled, "Where do you search if you've already searched every place logic and fragmentary clues would suggest?" That's where they were left in 1959, after two bodies show up 30 miles apart. And then nothing. Now, there were a lot of theories, and those of you who mentioned you're from Oregon, you know that there were a couple of people who believed they could solve this crime. Maybe, we don't know. But there was one guy in particular, a diver. And by the way, they dove that river a bunch. Right after it happened, in the first months before any bodies were found, they were in the water. Couldn't find anything. But this one guy wouldn't give up, Joe. Yeah. And wasn't it 2024? Yes. When he finally came up with something?
He did. And what this is leading to is the fact that they were able to recover part of the vehicle at this point in time. And as you can imagine, going back to the river, think about how much time has passed since then, 64 to 2020.
No, 58.
50, I'm sorry,
yeah,
58. So, you do the addition. You think about all of the silt that has built up, the vehicle being buried, what would be left of the vehicle as a result of the slamming against this structure, this man-made structure beneath the surface, and how fragile it is. And you would think, sitting there, I would imagine, could there possibly be any human remain left in this structure or in this particular spot? And Dave, they actually found something here.
Unbelievable. Based on this one guy, 66 years later, finding the vehicle, a Ford station wagon, and they did find human remains, and they were able to identify the family. After all these years, and again, it goes back to just finding them in the river is not enough. You got to find out, first of all, you got to prove who they are. You cannot ever assume. We could do a whole thing on misidentification. Actually, we have a show coming up on that, about an actual forensic expert misidentifying somebody and telling mom and dad, hey, that was your kid, and now you find out, no, my kid's still in the hospital. It's their kid. Go get them away from my daughter. Their kid's in the grave. I mean, yeah.
And misidentifications happen with great frequency.
And that's I didn't know that till I started working with Joe. I had no idea that was a thing. So they make sure before they come out, because you know what? Somebody could have done something and planted a body in there. I mean, it sounds crazy, but not finding a station wagon for 60-something years, that seems just as crazy. You're going to tell me it really was in there all that time? And it was. But they did identify the body. In April of this year, we're talking last month, Kenneth Martin, Barbara Martin, that was their daughter, and their daughter Barbie, the three who were not found, were positively identified.
Yeah, the theory is that the vehicle went into the water. There's a high probability that it inverted when it went in. My suspicion is that when this impact occurred, that the windows probably shattered. There's no way really to tell at this point in time. And how many of you, well, I know I can see from the audience, I've got many, like myself, kids of the 60s. What's the old country song about? The only restraint in the car we had back then was Mama's right arm.
Mama's arm.
Yeah, Mama's arm. Nobody belted, back then. So when you have a vehicle that inverts like this, or flips over on the roof, if the glass cracks out, which there's a high probability the glass was not, if memory serves me correct, the type of glass they had back then didn't cube like the safety glass we have now. It would have the flow. Remember, I talked about how substantial this flow is, so the bodies would be captured and washed out. When vehicles collapse and crush in on one another, on themselves rather, individuals are pinned. You've heard about people being pinned in vehicles. It just so happens that the youngest child and both of the parents were pinned within the vehicle. I think there probably would have been an awareness. I can't imagine that all of these people would have died simultaneously. And it would have been a horrific way to have passed on. And two of them were washed out. Now, this goes to the sample they were able to retrieve is, again, bringing it into the modern context. When our friends at Othram got involved in this case, you were able to, and again, we don't use the word closure, it's not our thing, but there is a resolution. There's a resolution, and also, the thought that anybody else could have potentially been involved in this. I think that's kind of poo-pooed at this point in time. And we think about this, and it seems like, going back in time, right, that 1958 was a long, long time ago. I guess it kind of was. Probably out of all the cases that we're presenting today, there are three. And the third one is one that you're not going to believe that we covered this year. And it is the greatest example, I think, of when all hope is given up, there is still hope. And this case comes to us out of Canada. Do I have any friends from Canada here right now? Okay, good. Let's talk about them. So,
Saskatoon.
Yeah, I'm just kidding. Yeah, this comes to us out of Saskatoon, and this is a case that has become famously known as the woman in the well case. Dave, open this up for us a little bit.
It's amazing. In June of 2006, everybody in this room was born then, right? God, somebody born in 20. They would be 20 years old right now. All right. This started in June 2006. Skeletal remains of an unidentified individual found by work crews excavating fuel tanks from an old gas station in the city of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. The investigation begins right away. Now, the remains actually had clothing that as they were doing this investigation, I remember talking to Joe about it off the air because this isn't something that I would think you would, immediately jump to. they had to find a historian that dealt in textiles, an actual historian that deals in textiles, so they could identify. You have to know everything about the clothing on the skeleton.
Yeah, let me, quick little aside here. I was involved in the exhumation of, I know I had somebody shout out, they were from Louisiana. I was involved in the exhumation of Dr. Weiss. If you don't know who Dr. Weiss is, he's the guy that shot Huey P. Long. And there were questions about that case, and I'd gotten involved in this case with an old friend of mine. If you look up his name, he's a pretty cool cat. He used to be up at George Washington. I think he's passed on now. Jim Starrs, Starrs. And he did like the exhumation of Jesse James's grave, those sorts of things. Well, I got involved with the thing with Dr. Weiss because there were questions. And guys, being involved in forensics, I never knew, I knew that textiles were a thing, relative to, because we do trace evidence all the time with threads and all those sorts of things. I never knew that the Smithsonian had a subdivision within their organization that you could avail yourself of with old fabrics. And the questions had run for years and years about Dr. Weiss. And after we had gotten him removed from his crypt and we had his body there, Dr. Starrs had arranged for a textile person to come in. And this individual was present while the body or the remnant of the clothing was being taken away, and they could analyze it and go back in time. So this is one of these fascinating things, little asides here about this particular case.
And so, again, you're talking about 2006, they find the skeletal remains in a well, and, the way that the body was packaged, think about it. You've got clothing. I want to get this. The clothing dated back, and it included a fitted jacket, a high-collared blouse, and a long skirt. The historian came back with the date between 1910 and 1920. So I remember talking to Joe, when you find skeletal remains, depending on how they've been wrapped up and preserved, can you tell the difference between decades? Was it 10 years, 20 years, 50 years? Can you tell? And you've got to, this is not a guarantee that that's when this woman was killed or died between 1910 and 1920. That's not a guarantee. I could have wrapped up a dead body in some old clothing, So can't assume anything. But she was also, after she's got the clothes on, they wrapped her in a burlap sack, then stuffed her into a wooden barrel. I got ahead of myself saying her, because I don't know how many cross-dressers there were back then. Some would have us believe there were a lot. The woman's body, wrapped in a burlap sack, stuffed into a wooden barrel, and dropped into the well. A well that had existed, and this is the part that really will get you. See, it was the Shore Hotel back in the day. Remember, they were excavating for gas tanks, and then they're going, wait a minute, we're sitting on the remains of an old hotel, and this was a well. So it was a hotel and boarding house, and here's the part I love. Where the hotel and boarding house had a mixed reputation in a bustling railroad town, and the Shore Hotel was demolished in 1927. So we're already 80 years past the demise of this hotel when the remains are found in the well. Yeah.
Oh, what's one of our working theories here, though? What did Dave say about the status of the remains? Did he say that her remains were merely dumped down into a well? No, they weren't. What had happened prior to her being dumped into the well? Anybody? She was wrapped, right? Not only was she wrapped in something, she was then placed into a barrel. So what do you think we're sniffing out here? at this point in time, right? Out of our 5 manners of death that we've talked about previously on body bags, right? We're looking at homicide. And of course, our working assumption in all death investigation is, I don't care if it's, a 98-year-old mamaw, okay, that I go out on the scene on, my working assumption is that every death is a what? Homicide until proven otherwise. Well, we have a lot of clues here, right? We have somebody that is trying, it's not like she was even buried in the backyard, okay? We might, if we see a burial in a backyard, that we have a body that's not cryptid or vaulted, we might assume it could be an old family burial, particularly during this period of time, that you find remains down there, and that you can kind of explain that. No, we're talking about somebody that is wrapped up, placed in a barrel, and then kind of cast off into the abyss. And here's the really creepy thing to me.
Wait a minute. Now it gets creepy?
Yeah, now it gets creepy.
Thanks, Joe.
This was somebody's drinking water.
Oh, my God.
Yikes. So
I knew it was coming.
You didn't think I could go to another level, did you? There you go.
Get the shovel.
It gets worse. But go ahead.
They break out and again, now remember, this investigation takes place 80 years after this hotel has been torn down, you can't assume anything, but you can use your brain. Based on the clothing, based on the way that this person had been thrown away, not just tossed out in a field somewhere, but actually in a way to disguise the death, these skeletal remains were investigated, and over the years, investigators, they were working to identify the woman. And think about this. You've got a dead body in Saskatchewan, probably not going to have a suspect you're going to have to go pick up. Now it's a whodunit. I mean, as bad as it sounds, it's somebody's relative, could be somebody's mother, I don't know. But what I'm saying is there's a different investigation that's taking place than one where, hey man, we got a killer on the loose, we better figure this out right now. Now they're looking at it historically. I mean, you're calling in, people to take a look at this. Isn't this a nice mystery? It's really not. I mean, it's a dead body. Even if it is 100 years old, it's still a body that was disposed of like common trash. We all have a certain amount of dignity to our lives, or it should. It's what separates us from animals and Koberger. But as we go in this one, over the years, the investigators tried everything. They finally did break this down, and they did figure out who it was, Joe.
Yeah, they did. And the beauty of this, when you begin to think about from an investigative standpoint, please understand when I say that. The beauty of this is that you have what's referred to as containment of the evidence and containment of the remains. Because how many cases do you hear about where you hear things like the mentioning of scattered human remains? That's not what you had. And she was wrapped actually in burlap. And burlap is kind of fascinating because it's actually pretty resilient. Actually, little side note, burlap is actually sackcloth. If you've ever read in your Bible about sackcloth and ashes, that's essentially what you're looking at here.
About the story of Jonah.
Yeah. So it's very, very resilient in the fact that you did have at least containment. Now, with the barrel, they found the bindings for the barrel, if you remember, the rings that go around a barrel and those sorts of things. There were nails that were found along with this, but you had it in a centralized location. And the absence of the use of the well any longer, I think, played a part in this as well. But you still have the water table that is rising and falling over the years, which impacts everything. The fact that they still had enough there to recover. And yes, let me ask you a question. She was identified, and again, with Othram being involved in this, because the Canadian authorities sought out our friends at Othram to take these samples to and ask them to identify. But she went by two names. I want to make sure I get this right. She went by the name Alice Spence and also went by the name of Alice Burke. She was born in 1881, to kind of frame that out for you. Now, there was no conclusion about her cause of death. Right. Because there was certainly no soft tissue. With soft tissue, we're looking for hemorrhage, and those days had passed. But just try this on for size. You think about genetic genealogy and the world that we indwell. And whether you believe in it or not, whether it scares you or not, it scares me, I have to tell you, because that's our code, right? That's who we are. And it's like spitting in the ocean. There's not too much you can do to hold it back. Okay, it's headed your way. But can you imagine multiple generations afterwards? You go to somebody's house, if you were the local authorities, after you've been able to build out this tree through Othram, and you go and you knock on someone's door and say, "Pardon me, do you have a family member from back right after the turn of the century, the 20th century, that went missing?" Can you imagine having somebody show up at your door and give you that information? And as it turned out, I think it was the descendant turned out to be a niece, if I'm not mistaken, that they showed up to this, and she would have been like her great, great, great aunt, okay? And, as we say down the South, I love to use this term, we always thought she'd just run off. How many times, we say that in the South?
Yeah. Saskatchewan Jane Doe,
yes,
right? She just ran off.
That's a mouthful, yeah.
In reality, they believe, and again, can't prove it now, but the belief is that her husband killed her. And it was interesting. I've read a number of things that her niece wrote after they contacted her. And it's just this, I can't imagine the waterfall of emotions that you would have, because at first you're kind of detached. It's not somebody you really know, it's a relative. But then you start thinking about it, and all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute. He got away with murder of my aunt. And then I can see that, that would kind of light a fire, and it would make you want to be involved. And that's the whole purpose of doing this today, is to do these stories so that you guys understand that we can all be involved in this. Joe hits this up every time we talk about Othram. Did you guys realize that Othram, there are cases all over. You probably got one, whatever city you're from, town, county, whatever. There's probably a case that hasn't been solved. One in your state that might be high profile. And they might have some DNA that can be tested. There is a solution possible. But with Othram, it is such an intense thing they go through to do this. They don't charge a lot of money. They're not funded by the government. They're not funded by any of the billionaires we hear about who want to sway politics. They're funded by crowdfunding sources. They crowdfund to solve these unsolvable crimes. $7,500. That's all they have to have. And they'll open up the case. Nobody's getting rich. When you look at the team of experts, the years of education, what they have developed, they will open up the case. Once their crowdfunding has hit $7,500, that's when they go, okay, guys, let's start. It's amazing. And you can all volunteer. You can be involved.
I've been involved in forensics for a long, long time, guys, okay, both as a practitioner and as a college professor, okay? And as I've gotten a bit longer in the tooth, there are certain things that draw my attention more. For me, it is my mission in life to get the unknown identified. And the reason I see it as my mission now is that I have stood over trenches where we had a potter's field, and we would wait until we had enough bodies to put them in the trenches, enough bodies to go and lay them out one by one. Never to be identified. It's not just about sexual assault cases. It's not just about homicide cases. You guys don't realize this. You probably don't. It's like my wife said on our first date.
Ouch!
She said, she looked at me across the table and said, until I met you, I never thought about death. Now, you can take that any number of ways you want.
She was sharpening the blade right there.
There you go. But to her credit, she's no different than anybody else. Right now, as we sit here, there are medical legal death investigators that are out on a skeletal remains somewhere, anywhere in the U.S., okay? And they are working on a recovery, or they've got a decomposing body that's floating in a river or in a bayou in South Louisiana, and they don't know who they are.
Or in the land outside of Vegas.
Yeah, or in the land outside of Vegas. You just think about the Lake Mead bodies, right? And some of those people have no ID whatsoever. The days of John Doe and Jane Doe, we're seeing the sunset on that. So many times over the years, working with the medical examiner in Atlanta and the coroner in New Orleans, I had to sit there, and there's this kind of sorrowful part to me. You sit there as an investigator and you think, did I actually do everything that I could have done? Now's the time, because just like David and Kristen Middleman have stated, their goal, and they are probably one of the most altruistic groups of people I've ever come across. Their goal is simply put, we want to clear the nameless list. There is nothing more noble than that. But I know right now of organizations, governmental organizations, that would rather put money toward frivolous things that politicians will always do. They've always done it. But it's a big slap in the face to all of the dead in the state, and all they have to do. And I've been to offices where there are literally cardboard boxes, guys, with skeletal remains just sitting on shelves. You don't think that happens? It happens. It's a very small price to pay. Where your priorities rest. How many empty chairs have there been at Thanksgiving dinners over the years? We just thought he ran off. I'll close with this. Years ago, how many of you guys remember the program on HBO called Autopsy? Bodden did it. Well, if you ever saw that show, they profiled one of my cases on there, and it was a guy that back in 1974 disappeared in South Louisiana. And the family, again, not to continue to beat this drum, they thought that he had run off. Well, a pest control guy came to the house, went under the house, and there, beneath the hollow stairwell that leads up to the front porch, they found almost a totally intact human skeleton with a rusted .38 pistol laying next to it. And he had been a mechanic, and you remember how the guys in mechanic shops had their names right here in that kind of oval shaped thing like Fred or Bill or whatever. You could still, Billy Bob, you could still make it out. He had bell-bottom jeans on, I'll never forget it, and I was laying right next to his skeletal remains underneath that house. The family found out he didn't run off that day, but that was dumb luck. There are a lot of them out there, these bodies, that people just assume that they vanished into thin air. They could be dead in the woods somewhere. You got a hunter that just comes along and finds them. These answers are out there. These questions are out there to be answered, and we are quickly headed toward the time where many of these questions are going to be, those answers will be accessible to us. And that's the beauty of it. So please keep this in mind. There is always hope. It doesn't matter how far back in time these cases go, right? It doesn't matter. There's always hope. We can always get people identified. And right now, there is probably somebody that you know or you're at least distantly connected to where they have a family member out there that they say, we don't know whatever happened to him or her. We have no idea. They just left and disappeared. They could be in a cardboard box somewhere on a shelf. And in our country, that should not be the case. Absolutely, positively. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is body bags. Thank you, guys.